Yes, Jason.
With the rapture,
Yes, rapture.
it says that Christians will go up
Yes.
to heaven and be with God.
No, it doesn't say to heaven.
Uh-huh.
And that's where some of the debate can be. So for instance, you would say, well, this one doesn't make sense, because why would you go up to be to heaven with Jesus only to come down right away for the millennium? That just doesn't make sense. Well, actually the word parousia is one of the words that talk of Jesus' return. And interestingly enough, this word was used for like when a king would come to a city. And this happened in history a number of times where the king would he's coming towards a city, and all those people who were, excited and with the king, they would come out of the city and meet the king and bring him and usher him into the city. And that's where this last view sees it as, because the scripture says that we will be caught up to the sky to be with Christ. And so if Christ is on his way down, then we could simply come back with him, and that's where that view could happen. I don't know if that answered your question, but I thought that's where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, that's really close to what I was getting at. It's just that I've heard other Christians speak about rapture.
Yes.
And like the way that they talk about it.
Yes.
It's like they skip death.
Right.
And they go to heaven.
Yes.
And they don't die.
That's true.
Like,
they won't die.
Yes. It's like the resurrection for them.
Yes.
In that moment. So.
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
And that comes from a passage in 1 Thessalonians.
Okay.
So
it's like they get their resurrected body.
Yes.
Without dying.
That's correct.
But they don't necessarily leave the earth forever.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So we could look at that passage that talks about that, since you brought it up. We have a little bit of, let's keep my eye on the clock here. I believe that's in 1 Thessalonians, could be 2nd. Let's see, the man of lawlessness is in 2nd. Coming of the Lord. Yeah, it says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, starting, the passage begins in 13, where he's talking about, I don't want you to be ignorant, brothers, about those who have fallen asleep. So he's telling them about Christians who have died. So if you're a Christian, you have died, and don't grieve, don't mourn for them. And he says, we believe that Jesus died and rose again, so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. So there we have this Jesus bringing with him those who have fallen asleep. So he is going to raise them. And then it says, according to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. In other words, they're going to be resurrected and given a new body first. And then we will be given a new body. We won't precede them, they precede us in getting the new body. And it says, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Okay, so he's coming, he's proclaiming, and those who are dead are going to rise, and they will have now a resurrection body. Okay? And then he says, after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words. Okay? So that's where that catching up, and then I think in 1st or 2nd Corinthians, probably 2nd Corinthians, talks about, and we will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. We could find that one also. But there is that instant change that he's talking about, the new body, the resurrected body. So here we see that those who are dead are resurrected. They're with Christ, coming with him. And here we see those who are alive being caught up together with them in the clouds. So that's that aspect. And so that's that view. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay. So those are things that are going to happen. And we'll get into a lot. I've got a few other details on there, and there's a lot more that we'll get into as time goes along. But let's start looking at some of these important scriptures. Jesus himself talked quite a bit about his return. And I'd like us to turn first to Matthew 24. In this passage, which is paralleled in Mark, the disciples were looking at the temple, and they were there with Jesus in Matthew 24, verse 1. Jesus left the temple, was walking away, and the disciples called his attention to the buildings. You know, look at this temple. It was very beautiful. And Jesus said to them, "Do you see all of these things? I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." Speaking of the temple. Now this was literally happened. This literally was fulfilled. When was it fulfilled?
AD 70?
AD 70. So do you know what happened?
It was a Roman general who came in and...
Roman general?
I think his name was Titus.
Titus?
And he destroyed everything in Jerusalem.
Okay. They destroyed Jerusalem. They needed more money, and Rome, and putting down a lot of uprising in Jerusalem. And not only that, but there was a lot of gold on that temple. And so they stripped it down, and as they were burning it, some gold goes in between the cracks of the stones, so they knock over all the stones to get out all of the gold, and they don't leave one stone on another. Fulfilling exactly what Jesus said would happen. And that was AD 70, and Jesus said that would happen in somewhere around AD 30-ish, 30, 34 range. So he says, "I tell you the truth, not one will be left on another." And then as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Now notice, you can glom all of those three questions together and assume that the sign of this happening, which is the temple being destroyed, would also be the same time as his coming and of the end of the age. But Jesus doesn't say that, and we'll see that in his answer. Okay? So these are different things. So we have this happening, which is the temple being destroyed, and then we see his return and the signs of the end of the age. And then he starts out and says, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming, 'I am the Christ.'" Has that happened?
Yes.
Absolutely. It happens frequently. So, you know, there's big popular ones, Sun Myung Moon. I think he just died recently. There has been ones like David Koresh, what that guy, Jim Jones, who led the thing down to Jonestown. Everybody drank the purple Kool-Aid, killed themselves, committed suicide. So there's been many who claim to be Christ, but they didn't come like we saw Jesus said that he would come, and we'll see that here. He says, many will come and say, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. That's what happened to them. They were deceived. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Has that happened?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's been lots of wars and rumors of wars since Jesus' time. But see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places, and these are all the beginning of birth pains. So he's saying that these things are going to be happening. Wars, rumor of wars, nations, fighting. And then he throws in this stuff about there's going to be earthquakes and famines. That's why whenever earthquakes start getting more rapid, people start taking notice and saying, oh, are we closer to the end? And the reason is because he said these are the beginning of birth pains. So does anybody know how birth pains work?
I have an idea.
You have an idea. I haven't experienced them personally, but I know how they work, so I know what you mean. So what's your idea of how birth pains work?
I mean, don't they, like you get these pains or contractions and they shorten as you get closer to the birth?
That's right. Yep, so...
You mean the timing?
The timing between, so what happens is that as a baby is getting ready to be born, the womb of the woman begins to contract. And the muscles are tightening up. And the reason is it's starting to move that baby down, pushing it out. And so they start out kind of gentle. And a lot of times women don't even feel those initial ones. And then over time, two things happen. One, they get more intense. And two, the period between them gets more frequent. So that generally speaking, for somebody who is trying to find out, when should I take my wife into the hospital? Or how close are we to having a baby? Generally speaking, you're looking for contractions lasting more than X amount of time and being every 1 or 2 minutes apart. And so once you get down to that frequency, you know, they start out and you might be every 15 minutes, but they're not regular. So when Emmy was pregnant, what I would do is, after a while, when the pains were coming more frequently, she would go, oh! So I'd go over and look at the clock and write down the time. And then, oh! Okay, that was 10 minutes. So we still have a ways to go before we're going into the hospital because they're 10 minutes apart now. She's not in horrible pain, but she's feeling something. But when she gets to the point of, oh, ah, you know, and then, oh, the next one, okay, well, that's 2 minutes. And it's now been going for 15, 20 minutes. Pack your things, we're heading into the hospital. So, that's how you tell. So Jesus compared these things to that of birth pains. And so we would expect then that things would be coming with more frequency and greater intensity, and that then would be demonstrating when it's very close to his return. Okay? That's the first thing. Now let's keep reading. Then he says, then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. Did that happen?
Yes.
Yeah, it's still ongoing. You know, certainly when Jesus was there, he was put to death, but his disciples weren't. But around AD 70, persecution arose pretty intensely. The Christians spread out. They were pushed out of Jerusalem, and many of them were put in prison. And even before then, Paul, who was earlier Saul, he was going and persecuting and putting Christians in jail and putting them to death. Then it says, at that time many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. Okay, well that doesn't sound good. People turning away from God and betraying. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Then it says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So there are some interesting statements in here. One, not only will the difficulties, the wars and things be increasing, but there's going to be this increase of wickedness. Jesus said that wickedness, evil, turning away from God, that will increase. You know, so I don't look to there being this big kumbaya moment of everybody is going to be turning to Christ. In fact, what Jesus said is at the end, there's going to be this increase of wickedness, and because of that, the love of most will grow cold. Most people will turn away from God. And then the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world, and the end will come. And so one of the things that some Christians see that verse, and they've made a map of the various nations, and say, well, here's a nation or a people group who has not been preached to. They don't have a witness of the gospel. And so they're raising up missionaries to send them there because they see that as part of the task, that until that happens, the end can't come. Now then there's another view that, as well as we'll see, that there will be a proclamation of angels as well, and of many people, as the trumpet sounds. So at any rate, there is going to be a proclamation of the gospel to all of the nations. And then in verse 15 it says, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof go to his house, roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in the winter or in the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress. Okay, now here's this tribulation. It says, for then there will be great distress. And it says, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equal again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. So there is going to be not only an increase in wickedness, but there is going to be an increase in the supernatural. And there will be false prophets and false Christs, and they will not only just be speaking, but they will be performing miracles and signs. Now these aren't like bogus ones. It says they're great signs and miracles. You know, Satan has the power to perform miracles. He can do things that to us seem impossible. And we see that the Antichrist is going to be performing signs and wonders. We see that, you know, back when Moses was bringing God's people out of Egypt, God gave him these signs to perform, and one of them was to throw his staff down, and it would turn into a serpent. And it became a snake. Well, the magicians of Pharaoh did the same thing. They threw down their rods and they turned into snakes. But then Moses' serpent ate up the other ones, and then he picked it up and it became a staff again. The point is that Satan can perform miracles and signs. And Jesus said that's going to be happening again. So just because you see a sign or a wonder, don't be deceived into thinking that must be God. Because it says to deceive even the elect, even those who belong to Christ. And there are some Christians who are so hungry to see a sign that they don't go and look at the life of the person or the situation going on. What's being preached with this? And there have been many false things preached, even in our days, among Christian circles, where people went after these miracles and things going on, but they didn't look to see, was the fruit of God present there? Was the Holy Spirit changing lives, bringing salvation, bringing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness? All of those fruits of the spirits that we sing about. The fruit, that work of the Holy Spirit. But instead, what you see is lying signs that don't have good fruit. So then Jesus goes on to tell them, so if anyone tells you, there he is out in the desert, do not go out. Or if they say, here he is in the inner room, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so it will be with the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. You know, that was always one that was like, what? What on earth does that even mean? But think of the imagery here. Jesus is saying that his coming is not going to be a mystery. You're going to be able to tell from a long ways off and know everywhere. And so if somebody is saying, oh, he's in this hidden room, he's in this place over here. Well, if you didn't see him coming, just like I don't have to be near lightning, it can be miles away, but you see it lighting up the sky. Same thing with vultures. When you're in the desert, you don't have to tell me that there's a dead horse up there or a dead animal, because from miles away you can see the vultures circling. They'll be above, and you know that right underneath there is some dead animal. Jesus is giving these examples of things that you don't have to be there. You can see and know what's going on. Jesus said, He will be coming in the sky. And it says, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened. Has that happened yet?
No.
I think so.
The moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky. Has that happened yet?
No.
No. You still have a few things that are coming up here. And the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all of the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And He will send His angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather the elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now He gives this passage about the fig tree. Now learn the lesson of the fig tree. Now that has some context. What is it? What are the things with a fig tree? He says the twigs get tender and the leaves come out. Well, Jesus said, even so, these signs that He just told us about will start to happen. And as they start to happen, then we will know. It says, even so, when you see all of these things, you will know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And then He goes on. Okay, now, before we just skip over that, that's a passage that people go, well, what on earth does that mean? That heaven, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. So Jesus said this when?
2,000 years ago?
2,000 years ago. So has the generation that was alive at Jesus' time, have they died already?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we can all agree with that. And so He says that generation's not going to pass away until all these things have happened. Now, how about AD 70 when the temple was destroyed? Was that generation, some of it, still alive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's why there is one view that says, the Great Tribulation has already happened. That everything that Jesus was referring to happened in that first generation, but we're still waiting for His return. Although some people would say, and He already returned. No.
I think that would have been documented.
That would have been documented, yes, definitely. And Paul talks about this with the church as we were seeing in 1 Thessalonians, you know, and then in 2 Thessalonians, he says, you know, don't get worried. Some among you are trying to deceive you and say that the second coming has already happened. He says, no, it hasn't. So, the question then is, what is this generation? Well, there's a couple ways to see this. First of all, it can be translated as race. So this race will not pass away. I don't know. While that's true, that would be not making a very strong statement, other than saying that people will still be around when Jesus returns. Okay, that's certainly true, I'm sure. Another way of understanding this is that this generation which Jesus was talking about what happening. He was giving signs that said that when you see these things happening, then you will know that the end is near. Right? Well, the question is, well, how near? One generation. Yeah. So another way to look at this is this generation, that is the generation that is around when these signs begin to occur, they will not pass away until everything is complete.